kind of crazy. This is nice. This is like I invited you guys to the conference room. I've had to write letters. It's messed up.
My downstairs
Yeah.
Well, let's get help.
Is
Work with your mom after this?
Is that?
All right. Oh. Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's approximately 11 a.m. on Thursday, June 4th. This is the Finance Committee of the City Council. Work to the roll.
Chair Kavanaugh,
Here.
Councilmember Rathmel,
Present.
Councilmember Hotchkiss,
Present.
and Councilmember Matavetsky is also present, as well as Mayor Cram, Director of Planning Julia Burling, Director of Festival, and Councilmember Middleton is present.
Virtually. Welcome, everybody. So we have kind of one thing on the agenda, which is the CDBG discussion. I think there's three different pieces to it. So we have the request to use previous year's funding to fund firefighting apparatus and turnout gear. We have the approval of the fiscal year 51 annual action plan and consolidated plan, and the allocations for CBG, ESG, and home money. And we have the actual content and wording of the consolidated annual action plan. So we have, which order would you like to tackle them in? I guess is the question.
Start with the comparing project.
All right, let's go with budget. So we're going to go to the fiscal year 51 budgeting. So I think I don't know if I think it's a combination. So last year went quite smoothly. CVAC made their recommendations. There were a few tweaks that said some kind of flowed through the process pretty smoothly last year. This year we have a larger dynamic between what CDAC recommended and what came through as the proposal down to council to approve. So we kind of try to get a handle on that, and some of the changes that why some of the changes happened, and so that's kind of what we're here to suss out, and whether there needs to be some negotiation over what's being allocated to who. Do you want to give an overview, Mr. Mayor, or
Sure.
Why the changes, or
Yeah, I think in probably each either page or each section may be helpful. So yeah, it kind of summed up. I think last year I call it going chalk probably with the CDAC recommendations for the most part. I think that there was a couple areas in which, through looking at the human service and capital applications themselves and kind of vetting things out to see where resources should be allocated, switch things up a bit. I think as it relates to, all in all, in terms of priorities, try to match the CDAC. Broadly speaking, and I've talked a little bit about this, and this is somewhat in the weeds and dealing with CDBG for more than 10 years now. My general philosophy on how the city should be successful with CDBG moving forward. This is also in the context of not knowing what the future of CDBG is, right? And this being up in the air until we find out what's going on this summer and fall with the federal budget system, is that we have two competing interests with CDBG, both which are mandated from HUD. Interest number one is that they want communities to spend on this funding very, very quickly. And number two is that they put somewhat odd, it seems, regulations on how you can spend the funding. So it's not just in the categories that are being outlined to benefit low mod income neighborhoods or national objectives, whatever that is, seniors, et cetera. But also too, that we're capped in certain areas where we can spend the money, which can be frustrating. HUD really does not want to see it as a service program heavy funding stream, which I think, both myself, CDAC would probably want to see a little bit more of that because it can be in fact impactful to different organizations. And then you have the fact that this funding is reimbursable. And so when we have historically dealt with either smaller nonprofits, newer nonprofits, both that aspect where they have to pay for it and then get reimbursed, in addition to the environmental reviews that are required by HUD, contracting, all of the paperwork. From a technical standpoint, CDBG is not the easiest type of funding to deal with. And so in the budgets, I think in this year's budget, balancing the needs of what the CDAC would like to see out there in the community, with also too acknowledging what it's going to take to administer this funding. And that in a lot of ways, having experience in this, there's certain funding types that we know are going to be spent down that can benefit the city, that can also benefit taxpayers and offset some of the costs that local taxpayers would have to pay for with the CDBG funding. So, I think there is the programs kind of top level, and then there's the capital in the human services specific, agencies that I think are kind of the key areas. And we can start with whichever one you'd like to start with.
I think since you started broad, could you speak to the two primary, adjustments that I believe you had conversations with staff about, and they responded still to move forward the recommendations that they did. So could you speak specifically to that $25,000 cap, and then also please to the minimum, thank you. And then also to the increase to the demolition line.
Sure. The cap is because of that thing that I just said about the ability for agencies to spend the money. In talking to some foundations and funders that are in the community, and talking to nonprofits that are recipients of CDBG funds, and just talking about kind of other mayors, it's clear to me that CDBG, we should be lowering the number of different agencies that are receiving funding and expanding the amount of funding that they're getting. That the city should say, hey, what are our small number of priorities as youth, as seniors, and fund the programs with larger funding amounts so they can have more sustainability, they can hire staff, they can provide even multi-year agreements with them, because the limit has to be somewhere. I mentioned this to Councilman Kavanaugh. So we're capped at, call it 260,000-ish in our human services. Of course, it would not be, no one is proposing that we give out $261,000 grants, right? That would be not prudent. And we're also not saying take that 260 and put it all into one agency. I don't think that would be a good idea either. So there has to be somewhere where we set the limit on of all of the things that Steve and his staff have to do, the contracting, the environmental reviews, that it makes sense to shift more towards a smaller number of agencies that are receiving more money. And we issued an RFP. This is not the first year that we provided a limit. Last year was, I think, 20,000. We went to 25 this year. I think that that's something that the city should continue to do. There are some, exceptions to that as it relates to like paying rent, which is a very discrete cost and it doesn't involve staffing or anything. But that's, again, my philosophy is that the city should really dial back the number of different agencies and fund the ones that we really believe in more, and also the ones that are high performing. An agency like Vines, Boys and Girls Club, they're very high performing. They have their stuff in on time. Known throughout the community as great nonprofits. So that's on the 25,000.
Wait,
No,
sorry. Yeah, let's camp out there for a minute.
Sure.
I had a question too. Whenever you guys are.
So I brought that topic to the Southside Neighborhood Assembly I said, okay, there's kind of these two philosophies. There's the one philosophy where we want to have less organizations getting more for higher impact and less administrative costs. And then we have the view that we want to support smaller organizations. It's a reimbursable amount. You're cutting out groups that are trying to do good things when you set a high amount because they don't have access to the money. And so I put that forward to the neighborhood assembly, and we got back, Rebecca was there as well, Councilwoman Beth was there, the idea that we should do an 80-20, that we should do 80%, maybe even higher, maybe $30,000 grants. So to get to 80% of the money and then have 20% of the money more at that $10,000 range so that we can try and meet the needs of smaller organizations without making it so many small grants. And I think that was an immediate response from one of the members. And my sense was that people thought that was a reasonable balance. And I think that's,
There was I mean, I think the sentiment was definitely that accepting those funds for smaller, even startups, smaller organizations should still be something that's made available. Kenya, what was your thought?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I had a question. Mayor Cram, you said high performing. So what does that mean? Because like talking to people and like they're always asking like how can they get funding? A lot of people don't want to apply for CDAC because they feel like the same people always get the same funding every single year. And honestly, I feel like that's a problem within itself. Like we should definitely be looking like Rebecca and Hadassah said, we should be looking at other nonprofits who don't always get the funding. And I know from my years being on CDAC and being there also now, like the Boys and Girls Club gets it every single year. Their teen program does not give, it's a great program, but I don't feel like it gives access to, like, it's only a small fraction of what it can do. And I understand it's, a funding thing, but like we should be giving to not just the same people over and over. I know that they're high performing, like you said, but like a lot of the programs that do apply, they're inclusive. Like, so they're really, really helping people. And we need to kind of get back into that, not just taking care of the high performing, like you said, nonprofits.
and the other piece of the 25,000 and for the RFP for this year and last year is my understanding from talking to members on CDAC and from talking to fellow council members was that council was not consulted on prior to those RFPs going out. In either case, neither was CDAC. So it was a unilateral decision, which is being pushed back.
I think that we shared with CDAC the RFP before it went out.
But you didn't consult with them, or you told them this is how it's going to be, or you said we're inviting input and you represent the community and that's your purpose. And I think Councilman Rathbone, one of the things you wanted to establish early on in the meeting was what CDAC's purpose was, and I think we skipped past that. So I want to make sure.
Steve, you want to weigh in on?
They were informed. I do not believe they voted or approved any RFP. I don't believe they were. They were notified of it.
Okay.
So they clearly did not appreciate it because they made recommendations in opposition to it.
So here's the thing. So at the end of the day, so who is tasked? Who has the responsibility of responding to U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development on spend down? That's an open-ended question. Who has the responsibility? Okay, so the administration. So some folks that work with it. And so part of what my goal is that knowing that over the years with smaller agency grants, with working with startup agencies or agencies that have never received HUD funding before, there have been long delays. There have been issues with them getting the money spent. There's a substantial amount of staff resources that are assigned to it. And I did outreach again to people who receive funding, other people that are doing grants, and that this is just from an efficient way of getting funding out the door from HUD is a direction, the city has to move into, because again, we have to kind of draw the line somewhere. And that's what you said about having an availability for smaller grants, or if there's maybe a single entity that can then have sub-recipients, right? And this is just me hypothetically talking, we discussed this, because I brought this up and I've been having conversations with the planning department about it, is that what if you took 50,000, you gave it to the United Way and said, hey, you are tasked with doing $5,000 micro grants to
That also came up as outside neighborhood.
to organizations. Maybe you say it's for this specific purpose, maybe it's for a variety of different purposes to benefit residents, and that the United Way is in charge of those activities. The thing is that each one of those, just because we give it to United Way in a block, those specific activities still have to meet the contracting and reporting and environment. So we could schlep that off on the United Way for them to be kind of responsible for that. That I think it's possible. It's just we don't ever get out of having to report that $5,000 activity to HUD.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to cut you off, Mayor. I do understand all those things, but like I said, I just feel like the same people are getting the same money every single year. And even though they are high performing nonprofits, I don't think it is fair to other ones, smaller ones, even if we can do a training and show them or just be on top of them, because we're really doing a disservice to the city if we are not helping everyone. If we're doing the same people every year, I know right now there are funding cuts, but like every single year, the Boys and Girls Club, back to using that again, because I've been on CDAC and they've covered that every single year, but nothing with them in particular to me, but just every single year we're covering that. Are they looking for other streams of funding, or are they depending on just us? We really need to diversify what we give inside of CBG funds in order to help the community, because like I said, again, if we're giving to something that's just separated to one thing, it's not really helping. So we're not using the CBG funds properly. So that's just my opinion.
Do we have a
I just want to make sure Nate has a chance to actually say what he wanted to say.
I think we got there. We got there with like the micro.
Would it be okay if a high performing, we spend on new agencies that spend money? And I think that's the challenge. Right, and it's not based on and I think that's where we need the clarity, is because without a clear benchmark on how we're identifying high performing, we're missing each other in the conversation. And high performing, so if we talk about that $25,000, the approach that you just represented, and that was shared, not consulted with CDAC, but shared to CDAC, they had discussion, is my understanding. I mean, I was there for the early beginnings of it, but CDAC members had discussion at length regarding that approach, and they unanimously rejected it. And I think it's important to consider that. So yes, there's the administrative burden component to consider. But if we're talking community impact and we're defining high performing by household served, children served, extent of services, to Councilmember Middleton's point, that was the very reason that CDAC members reduced the amount for the Boys and Girls Club, because they saw a lot of duplication, which the representatives who presented on behalf of the Boys and Girls Club confirmed. There's a lot of duplication in those programs, so the extent and scope of the service isn't as broad as other programs that were then cut. I think with and I again represented like Community Development Advisory Council members spent the better part of 9 months deliberating all of this, and I think that's my primary issue when it comes to making the significant changes that have been recommended. I think the fiscal responsiveness spend down is certainly something to be aware of, although the other part of this agenda, whether we get to it or not, is that we haven't been timely spending the funds down. So if we're identifying that as a commitment and a priority, I'm not sure we're doing a great job, which wouldn't be Steve's fault. That's not what I'm indicating. So I think that's my conversations with CDAC members also represented the reason they unanimously rejected the $25,000 minimum was because there were several organizations that had not previously spent, they didn't even ask for that much for the reasons that Councilmember Matovetsky represented. And there were others that had not spent down that amount in the past. So to me, it doesn't, I understand the approach that you're representing, but I don't think it's as has been represented.
Steve, I was wondering, so the number of grantees versus the number of applications that came in, how many applications would you say came in?
That would be
Response
on
to
the, that would be the list that you got from the CDAC that had listed all the applicants. Oh, I don't want to say. That's 20 or something. I'm
And
not
we
sure.
funded how many, see that shows up on how many.
Most of them.
So,
And then there was, because the RFP was for
For
$25,000, we don't know how many people would have applied had they known that it was maybe, potentially, not decided at this point, possible to get less.
About that.
Okay, so it's a similar number. We don't think that there was less applicants this year with the $25,000 RFP.
but to
That's good.
Councilman Middleton's point, just perhaps a little more, maybe outreach, a training or something on the application.
I do an application training.
Okay,
Very thorough. It's really good.
so that is out there, it is.
I did application training. You attended it, didn't you?
I did.
It was-
The description of the grants of.
It's within like a week.
ESG.
Yeah.
ideas, ways and means of-
Agencies were invited, only a few handfuls showed up. I did indicate the $25,000 minimum in that.
Something on the application.
Yeah.
So you have a list of the agencies that you reached out to?
I sent it out to listserv. I have a listserv of interested people. It's like 100+ names, which includes most of the agencies that apply.
Which is most of it.
What is the literacy group?
They did not.
Staff.
Literacy volunteers?
That's financial.
Literacy volunteers?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did not apply. But I double checked, they were on the listserv and they were contacted.
I think the only comment I would have on the outreach piece of it, do you have an affirmatively furthering fair housing outreach, like statement or target strategy for, because I'm aware of town listserv in terms of how you're intentionally targeting the folks who are least likely to apply. Is that a conversation that's been?
So applications for CDBG tied to the affirmatively further fair housing? No, we don't have, there's no specific connection there.
There is.
We do have a public participation plan, yeah.
Okay, that's sure, like. that's
Yeah, we
what
have a
I'm
citizen
getting at
participation
is-
plan, yeah.
And so, and if we transpose the expectation that the efforts are targeted to because these are for low income, LUMA communities, like, what did you call it, I'm sorry? Participation.
Citizen
So
participation
so
plan, yeah.
does it identify like how you'll target the folks least likely to necessarily engage at like because we have the same like not everyone's gonna come to council chambers.
Yeah, so
So
what we do is we put legal ads in the paper. We put, I contact everybody on my listserv, and depends on whether we're talking about the original applications or the budget feedback ones. Budget feedback and initial recommendations, those include posting at VHA, senior center, grocery stores that allow it.
Availability is posted in the paper.
The availability is listed in the paper as well.
Maybe I can kind of translate here, Rebecca, hopefully this is what you mean. That in other areas of federal funding, there's this onus to say, okay, this can't be a passive process where you post an RFP, you make it available, but because it's likely that the communities being served or the nonprofits are going to be serving folks that are hard to reach, right? That there has to be affirmative steps beyond just meeting the minimum legal definition of doing outreach and making sure that people are aware. Is that kind of what you're saying? And because that happens with fair housing
It is,
stuff,
and
yeah.
I think under HUD, it's an appropriate consideration. And there was a part, at least at this point, of conversations with CDOT when they asked every single applicant what their outreach strategy is and how they're making sure that they are targeting the communities least, the households least likely to. And several of the allocations were made specifically on those notes as well. And I mean, not to continue bringing it back to you, but it's just kind of an unfortunate, really good example, the Binghamton Girls and Boys and Girls Club. Like there was also significant concern around not just the duplication, but why the duplication? Because there is no targeted outreach approach. So I think, and I guess I bring that up, like these are all things that the 11 members on CDOC really deliberated.
Well, I can say our lists are, we don't mail anything out, like we don't like send mailings out to like the housing authority, things like that. We do note, well, we have the listserv. The listserv includes anyone who has displayed interest in receiving feedback from us. And I always ask, would you like to be added to the listserv? Now that includes the agencies, but it also includes people like Tarek is on there because he wanted to be interested. Anyone who's expressed interest, I always say, would you like to be put on the listserv? There's no qualification. You just, I ask if you want to be put on there, and I will put you on there. Now I remove you if the email breaks after a while. It does. People move jobs; they don't notify us. So, but the listserv is my main outsource other than the legal ad. It's open to anyone who wants to be put on it. So it is our main method of reaching out. Now that doesn't include like the housing authorities. The housing authorities go then and take this. Hey, by the way, these are the applications. This is the process, and let everyone know. I have talked to housing authorities before about more proactive connections with their tenants, and it's not really, we're not really established anything firmly, but it's something we could definitely pursue with them. Same thing with OFB, Metro Interfaith. Those are agencies on the listserv. Same thing. They have communities of low income, disabled, elderly, whatever, that could definitely benefit. So there is outreach to those agencies that sort of oversee or are connected with those individuals. Other than that, I mean, I can put up ads in the grocery stores that allow it. Not all the grocery stores allow you to post up any ads. And we do it for the budget. We do it for, please tell us how you want to spend this money. Here's the budget. You know, it's two different terms. The second one is please tell us what you think of the budget, which is active right now. But for the actual RFP for the ads, we generally don't do that, but we can do that. I mean, it's just doing the same thing we do for everything else. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Steve. Can we move to the demo, or is there more on the 25,000?
Well, I guess, I don't know, I haven't sat through the CDAC conversations, but when we've talked about city money previously, I know the mayor's often talked about the idea of leveraging the money towards other money or towards creating sustainability. And it sounds like some of those conversations are going on here. And I guess I'm not sure what you've represented today in terms of deliberately trying to channel large amounts of money to the same organizations in perpetuity to create that sustainability versus when we've talked about other projects where you said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to use this money to get state money or other outside money to get like, so I guess I'm curious about that balance and how you differentiate that.
I would say that in general, whether it's specific agencies or the HUD budget in general, a lot of this is the mixture, you know, it's poetry and prose, right? There's the hard numbers, it's looking at data and saying, hey, you've got a budget for a large project. This represents just a portion of it. And there's no remainder funding to accomplish the rest. It wouldn't make that a very high profile or competitive application, in my opinion. You also have, you know, there are different agencies that are doing programs in previously identified either neighborhoods of investment or areas of investment that we want to focus on. You know, there are geographically even where these agencies do the funding out of, as I think an important you know, conversation. You know, for example, the Urban League and the Attain Lab, that partnership for that rent is one of the reasons why First Ward Action Council was able to confidently rehab that property and save the historic asset. And so keeping that Attain Lab in operation for that building and for that neighborhood is more impactful than if it was the same services were maybe plopped at another location throughout Binghamton. So there's a variety of different factors that kind of go into that. You know, the Boys and Girls Club, again, they are in the first ward on Clinton Street, one of the few youth services providers that's physically located on that corridor. They're important. We have the downtown revitalization initiative that's putting in funding there. They are going to continue to serve as an important partner to provide investors and residents confidence in that is kind of a vibrant neighborhood business district. So it's a combination of a lot of different things.
To speak to that perpetuity piece. So sustainability, sure, but the funds aren't necessarily intended to be for
Yeah, no,
in perpetuity, but even if they were, it shouldn't be in perpetuity without demonstrating performance. I think that like CDAC has talked about whether or not we implement performance metrics or performance objectives when it comes to evaluating these applications, so that there is an objective standard to represent scope and impact.
And I would be supportive of it. If CDAC wanted to adopt an objective standard scoring, something that can be derived solely from the applications themselves and hard numbers, I would be supportive of that because it's empirical. You know, when we talk to, and I tell this story all the time, HUD representatives from the Obama administration came in to town and learned more about Vines, and they said, we're not sure that there's a better nonprofit in that we've seen than Vines in terms of the combination of youth and sustainable food systems and reducing blight and everything that we're doing. I would love an opportunity to provide Vines more funding. And I think they're a notable and exceptional nonprofit and have been for their entire existence. Is there a way that can empirically be compared against another youth services agency or Action for Older Persons that can show return on investment, not for the city, but for the taxpayers in terms of helping people sign up for the right type of healthcare? How does that weigh versus something else? I think it may be difficult, but I would be in support of that. It would make it not as much poetry and more prose, I guess.
Well,
I will
I
say
know at
that
least one council member who needs to appoint a CDAC appointment, and maybe we can get some people with some of those skills to help support the people who understand the nonprofit sector.
this has come up with CDAC before about the metrics, and I will say it is difficult to compare. ESG is very easy to compare agencies. It's very, just because the amount of data that's collected in performance reviews. When it comes to CDBG service agencies, just the breadth and scope of what they do makes it very difficult. You could compare, say, the Boys and Girls Club summer program with the Urban League summer program. Sure, they're both summer programs for youth. But, you know, as the mayor said, how do you compare, how do you compare the Rice Foundation FACE program to the CARES Backpack program to, mothers and babies, it is, but it's the method of how to figure that out.
Yeah, I think it's worth considering because we've got larger categories of potential priorities to consider. So Mary just mentioned geographic location. Like being able to identify where the universal components of and bring it back to the priorities identified in the comp plan would be the ideal, to review and essentially rank those applications by and develop the scoring metric. Like it's how a lot of, it's how COC is done, it's how ESG is done. Like there are ways to do it that don't get into, that would inform conversations around, okay, FACES is serving this many in this priority neighborhood where Attain is serving this, like you can do households, you can do geographic location, you can do number of persons served, you can identify specific outcomes that they've demonstrated and whether or not they met them. Like, so I think I'm throwing it out there as something that would really give it, because then it's not this like back and forth between priorities that Mayor Cram is representing and something like a different understanding of priorities that CDAC was representing, although I think that conversation is valuable. I think it adds an element of objective review. And gives agencies the opportunity to know what they're shooting for when they're providing the services.
So just so you're aware that, oh, sorry.
No, just another thing just to kind of throw out there. It was not disallowed by HUD, but in the past, have been agencies that are serving Binghamton residents, but the facilities and the services done outside of the city. To me, I would view that, even of all things being equal, less impactful than an agency that has a physical location and staff and everything within the city. So that could be part of a list of things that is either yes or no and can be weighed as part of it. But again, CDAC, council has more appointees to CDAC than I do. If that were to take place, I would be in support of that. A rubric, a more objective, meaning different even questions based on that for the application. I'd be supportive of that.
I will say this, I have done this before where we did a points-based evaluation system of the application. Gave it to CDAC. CDAC said, oh, well, the program I like's not looking good. So they basically just threw it.
Well, that's a poor implementation of a points ranking.
No, but it was a point system. It was a point system.
Yeah.
They looked at it, they agreed to the point system. The applications were notified, this is a point system. CDAC sat down with the point system, ran through it, and then decided they didn't like it because it didn't help the agencies they subjectively liked. I mean, that's what happened.
No, I don't, I think they.
But now this was a
I
few
mean,
years, this was a few years
There's
ago.
always things, there's
There's
always things that are missed in those things, but it helps to have
It's a
that.
tool.
It's a tool towards making a decision. I don't think it should be, we're not looking to automate the process.
Make those.
I mean, I think that like shows that it could be problematic if there isn't a point system. It's just like, I would want to support this agency, I like them, and not because it's serving maximum number of people.
Now, the COC, I will say the COC does a pretty good comparative objective and subjective. And their methods for measuring are fairly good. They have the objective numbers, which are, it's cut and dry. You're given these numbers, and then there's the subjective ones, which comes into narrative. And again, it's going to come to the feelings of the individual CDAC members if we did something like that.
I'm in support of that. If CDAC wants to develop that.
So when did you put that, was
It was
that
a
part
few
of
years
the
ago.
reporting process back as they're getting money and closing out their year, or was it part of the application for next year?
It was the application for that year. It was application for the next year.
Well, and it's why, I mean, in it was because COC does that well. I mean, 2017, 2018, I think is when we started to do that objectively for ESG.
Mhm.
And again, it's more functional. And so I think it's worth that. And I'm certainly happy to support. Do we want to talk demo or are we not there yet?
Well, I think, let's get to, I think we jump right through this paper page, and we'll get the demos from that. So in the packets, everyone has the budget.
You all have this printed out budget, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I think it was the May for the CDAC proposed book is on.
So first page is the income. So there's actually a slight difference between CDAC and what came through in the budget. $1,600.
Correct. Because CDAC did not have the final numbers by the time it came.
So now we have final numbers, it's $43. All right. And you feel that $35,000 income is about right?
I believe I based that off of, I based it off the current, basically, how much have we gotten since the beginning of the fiscal year? How much more time do we have left in the fiscal year? We estimate we'll get that similar amount
Similar
per
pace.
day, per month, or whatever by the end of the year. It's an estimate, and of course, it's one of those things that city council will be dealing with this year. We will modify that. That's why we put program income into the client-sided rehab projects for home and CDBG, so we can sort of leverage, we can modify that at the end of the year when it's in the final numbers.
Great. All right, next page. Economic development, contractual line. So it has, so this is one of the lines that we had not been spending down in previous years. It had
That's salaries, yes.
Yes.
The LDC is salaries.
So I bridge over to the topic of using past money. This was from the lines, I believe, that had $77,000 left in it previous years. Well, per year.
Yeah.
So what was I've got a clear explanation why that wasn't usable for we originally decided to use it for it, and now will this amount be used? What's trying to use it for?
A few years ago, HUD basically made more clear what their expectations were about salaries that we can use and how the expectations on tracking and what can reasonably be applied. In order to ensure that the city's in compliance with that, we had to drop significantly some salary areas to the extent where we know that we're going to be able to back this up with the HUD certified, number of hours kind of work. So that's why that number, I would love for this number to be, more than that. But this is what is available to continue to follow the HUD guidelines. Steve, is that
Yeah,
generally correct?
and we generally like to spend salaries in the year that allocated to them. That makes sense. So for this budget year here, this is specifically for the time period of September 1st to August 31st. September 1st of this year to August 31st of next year. So we would prefer spending those monies that were allocated to that year to be a little bit more tight on exactly where the money's coming from. Yes, that leaves older money out there, but then when there's money left over and projects come along, as Megan has said, the city council meeting, that's when we determine we can use the lines.
So money was set aside for salaries in those previous years. We didn't have a drop in personnel in the department, I don't think. So we just made it up out of general fund,
Yeah, so
essentially.
it's basically, as you'll see in the budget, there's a contract that happens between the city and the BLPC, and it's a reimbursement for expenses, yeah.
But it's per HUD hours, and they have the percentage of the LMI businesses that they serve. Yeah, there's a process.
And the target
Youth program, next page.
Because I'm a little curious of what the target areas are. Is that something that's easy? for-
Yeah.
Well,
It's on the, it sounds like areas portal.
Well, it's a little, okay, so it's complex. Yeah.
Because I'd like to know, like, particularly for me in my district, what areas are
Okay, so,
targeted so that
well, and that's the thing, it's not necessarily target areas. So if you go to the Broome County GIS portal, we can pull up the LMI target areas, which are currently correct. I checked with Doug English, and we're having some issues because census changed some tracks, so I'm having some issues I have to resolve. But so what it works is a business qualifies as low income if they employ low income individuals, or if they provide a service in a low income area, or if they provide a service or something that targets specifically low income or presumed low income people. For example, a medical store, we would presume would serve people that are disabled, which would automatically qualify. A bar or a service type business would serve, it's within a low mod area, we would assume that's a low mod business. If someone is hiring someone, and this is where it gets really complex, depending on where that business is and or where that person lives, they can automatically be qualified as low income. That's where it gets into the weeds like that. That's where it's this weird sort of, it's based off poverty, it's based off whether it's in central business district. There's these sort of like check marks we have to do. Currently, it's essentially a corridor along Main Street, and that's sort of the general gist of the automatically qualify as low income job. So businesses can be low mod area, low mod clientele, low mod jobs, all of those can qualify for a low mod business that the BLEC hosts.
is there a way to get a map for Southside?
I mean, you can
Because I'd like to know.
you can easily see the LMI. Well, I can tell you there's no automatic qualifies for low income jobs. You can see the low mod areas on Broome County GIS. Yeah, that's easy to see. Just the low mod area is easy to see on GIS.
Okay, but Julia.
Pull it up right now, we can show you.
Okay, well, we can do it after.
But if you showed me like a place that sells wheelchairs that's outside of the low mod area, I'd be like, yeah, that would qualify because they sell wheelchairs. Okay.
So that qualifies them to get assistance from our economic development folks to do what?
No, so
Sorry,
they
I'm
okay.
very confused
So,
about
sorry,
what
so-
this is.
They had applied for something from economic development. Economic development people were spending time dealing with them they could then bill their hours
Okay.
back to the
Yes.
client.
Okay,
And
It's a building.
Yeah, it's a billing
Right.
issue. And it's,
Okay.
and honestly, it's just communications. I don't even go with that, if they talk to them, they report that they talk to store 123 Main Street, 123 Main Street's a like considered a LUMA service area, that qualifies as a LUMA qualified business.
We'll
For
just
purposes of
reimburse
tax.
in the same way, right? For-
Our tangents
Similar, yes.
from the track.
Yeah.
And she's very clear about what we can and can't spend time on. I can't spend time.
right, I'm thinking from the, like, how do I help my district perspective, not from the
Well-
Binghamton. Like, I'm trying to understand how this interacts and how I can take this information and try and
Business-wise,
move improvement.
business-wise,
where?
have them talk to economic development, have them call economic development. There's a lot of programs that are out there, have them call economic development. Just anybody. Encourage, that's your job.
Right, youth program. So there are 5 recommendations in the budget currently. 2 boys and girls clubs that were 7 programs. Original request was 26,000. CDAC suggested 20. That's come to 25. Teen Center, CDAC approved 20. The request is 25. The current budget has a full 25. Urban League request was 15. I'm sorry, 25. CDAC recommended 15. Current budget is 25. CARES didn't make an application. CDAC recommended 10. Current budget has 25. Wines request was 40. CDAC put in 10. And current budget is 25. The league. And there were a few things cut out. The
Hard to compare because nothing's formatted the same.
I don't. But the let's see.
I'm trying to figure out what you would qualify under that. I don't have the list of see approved.
Maybe you'll be faster. Like,
Yeah. Boys and Girls Club, the one that they didn't get funded for.
So the that's the after school. No. The after hours program. So they originally requested the after hours program was
After hours program is not funded.
correct. So they requested 50. CDAC originally recommended 20, and so that has come. That was not recommended to be funded.
Just ignore the zeros. That was.
I originally remember thinking that face had been taken out, but it's in a different. Yeah,
Right.
I'm not sure. I was
So
just looking
so a
at
couple
that.
things got moved around.
Yeah, I did. Just need-
Some of the, so if you go to the human services,
Yeah.
some that, maybe considered, or you think, okay, that's youth, like Esther D. Rice,
Right.
that's in human services.
So
Steve, were you involved in how that split up was? Or whether it's youth or human, it's not really that important, they're all human services.
Yeah, no, I think I put Asper D. Rice in the general.
Okay, because they
This is
do
just
work
munis.
with parents, yeah.
Yeah, it's just municipal. Yeah.
And I want to point out that
Yes.
the YMCA downtown is reducing their youth services. They are repurposing a lot of their time and facility to housing. So picking it up additionally in the Boys and Girls Club. Central, what's really gonna hurt us is the YMCA is walkable. A lot of the youth population are have nowhere to go after school. That was
But
just
the
part of
after hours program is cut out.
but the team,
that was
Seen
Boys and
after
Girls.
hours, yeah, with-
this is included.
Wait, which,
Center,
sorry, you just said.
I'm getting confused and lost here.
oh, well,
So there were 3 Boys and Girls Club proposals.
Mhm.
There was an after-hours teens program, which I see a teen center, but I
That's a
guess
different one, yeah.
that's a different one. So yeah, and then there's a teen center, and then there's a summer program.
Fees, yeah.
So, and we got summer program fees, and we got teen center, but not the
Correct.
after hours.
So CDAC data, so Boys and Girls Club overall between those 2 programs originally asked for like $101,000. CDAC was funded into 2020, so 60,000. And proposed budget is at 25 for summer, 25 for teen, and cut the after hours. So a $10,000 reduction from CDAC and a $51,000 from the actual.
Which is and I think that's where, like, the
So correct. Let's hold on to that. So as it relates to, again, broadly on this, again, in trying to, I started from the starting point of that $25,000 position. Boys and Girls Club, we're working with them to clean up some old funding, which was priorly awarded for the after hours, to see if they can take advantage of that. So I've been in communication with Boys and Girls Club. I've been in communication with a lot of these agencies, talking to them on different things. So
that's why it's a great meeting to have. So
Yes.
we can suss out those things.
Yeah.
So they may have some more funding coming from previously allocated funds.
that's correct. That's correct. For after hours. So it was during COVID times, and they were not able to spend it.
CDBG money, ARPA money,
CDBG.
CDBG money unspent.
there's still money in some of these other lines that are sitting there. That's
That
already allocated.
doesn't count against them as being high performance because they didn't spend it down. I'm just getting confused because we're defining things.
Yeah, my understanding was basically during the COVID timeframe that they couldn't do the funding or they couldn't do the programming. So again, when we have agencies, and we can talk a little bit about Fairview, when there is money that's out there previously that, or in years where they're not spending what they've previously been allocated, instead of adding additional funding to it, it's, well, let's look to see what you can spend out in this year. And then if there's additional services, again, being aware of what the cap is and understanding we can't exceed that, we can work with them throughout the year to see if we can augment that funding. But I wouldn't want to put forward in the budget a higher number than what we think could potentially reasonably be spent.
But for CDAC, that was the reason that they rejected the $25,000 minimum, was the feeling and the sense, and in conversation with applicants about whether or not they could actually spend the $25,000.
Yeah, and that may be, I don't want to call it like a difference of opinion, because I don't think I'm really like in opposition to anything that anyone said today, but just from my perspective, I think that in general, right, we need to have, and Kenny, I appreciate what you said too, is again, just have a floor of this is the minimum grant amount because of all of the administrative work, et cetera, that, contracting and getting it out the door. That's more from where the 25,000 number is coming from me. And I could talk at length about nonprofits and management, everything else, which I won't do.
Well, so I want to bounce back. So between the youth programming and the human services pages, which I think I will together. I just wanted to cover things that kind of got left out of the budget altogether. So makerspace being one of those. They had $30,000 request, suggested 15. There's some reasoning behind.
Just in terms of, again, having the 25,000 and trying to fund as many programs as possible, there are going to have to be cuts. One of the things that I put out that certainly would have been near the top of my list, but I wanted to make sure that the agencies had money, was the recommendation for the community policing, right?
We'll get there.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm going through them.
I think for CDAC, I was there for Triple Cities Makerspace. They were extremely impressed with that application. They did a site visit. It was a transparent conversation about why they needed the funds, what their goals were, that like their application represented something that CDAC members felt were significant or had potential for significance. So that's my understanding of that reasoning for the allocation.
Okay. The next blank is stack project, and that's for $75,000. CDAC came to the odd amount of $6,240. I don't know if there's any context to that.
Now that I have the notes, the minutes are in front of me.
And then it's been zeroed out in the budget, I mean, other than the $25,000 minimum.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily understand the $6,000 number. We had previously supported a stack project through ARPA funding. I think it's a good organization. They've also received some significant funding from SUNY Broome part of for capital side.
Yeah.
I think they should absolutely be a competitive applicant in the future. I'm not sure that there's a clear, vision right now about what the agency is going to be, where they're going to be located. And the fact that CDAC had them in the lower end of the funding requests was, to me, indicative of, that was not funded one of the higher funded funds.
The only comment I think I'll have on that one, I think we are anticipating some outreach and stories from Phil. The disconnect there for me was the focus on financial empowerment, which is identified as a priority in the comp plan. And so that to me is a disconnect where we're not, like the fidelity to the priorities identified in the comp plan doesn't seem to be consistent.
Let's see. LUMA had a significant request of 84,000. CDAC recommended 15. The proposed budget raised to 25. I mean, it's assuming this is enough of a chunk of what they're requesting. If it's going to be still, I'm worried sometimes of things that get underfunded will not be able to effectively program and make use of the
I
money.
can answer this question. We have asked this question before at CDAC. They at one time asked for it to be put on the applications. What's the minimum amount of funding you would need? What?
Isn't it still on the application?
No, the minimum amount. What's the minimum amount? And we'll say, what we asked for, the minimum, we can't survive without it. We're like, well, we can't fund you, we can fund you at 10. And they're like, okay, we'll take it.
Right.
It's every agency like that. I can't say that there aren't agencies that wouldn't be able to cooperate without a minimum funding, but you can't get that information
It's
from
hard.
the agencies.
I understand. There's some things like when we were trying to like Fairview funding, I think for a while, but part of the funding for them was funding a person, right? So if you cut that salary back, like there's no longer funding for that person. Like, and so a situation like that, you might have a.
I think that's where
an
you
actual-
see in ESG allocations, it's almost entirely salaries for exactly that reason. Like some nonprofit missions can be or lend more toward supply drives and outreach support, but actual people to.
And this is something I could bring up to CDAC in the future. They're always eligible at saying, hey, let's only fund this specific thing in the application, but they haven't so far.
Oh, I mean, actually, here, the next thing down the list is the Fairview one. So, right, that they have the intensive care navigator. They asked for $55,000 for it. CDAC at 30. The current budget is at 25. Like, can they fund the insurance navigator?
Yes.
Somehow.
So I spoke to Pat at Fairview, and this is the same thing where historically speaking, this has been a position with a lot of turnover. It's a high impact type of position if you can think about the work. They also have previous years which are identified in the sheet we haven't got to yet, that if something comes up where they're in a need, but historically they have not been spending that allocation, and so we wanted to kind of right size it for them.
City of Binghamton Park Rangers, are we still going to be able to take? They asked for $30,000 for the park ranger.
Yeah, so we'll have to pick up the rest of the tab in the budget, basically. So that's just something that's simply a reimbursement for a program that exists, and we'll continue to fund it. Competing, these are all these are the competing interests, right? If we funded that at the full amount, it's less money that I have to worry about putting together the budget next year, but another agency maybe doesn't get funded.
Here's backpacks. See that 25. They didn't make a request, and they're funded 25.
Yeah, CDAC was 10.
Yeah, sorry, sorry. CDAC recommended 10. That's what I said.
No, you said.
CDAC recommended 10. They
Yeah.
didn't apply. Current budget has a 25. I know it's been a fairly long-standing program. I think CDAC had a pretty intense conversation that maybe there's other priorities.
I think it was more for CDAP, the non-application. So there's like a belief in the program comparable to the $10,000 amount that was represented, just based on what they spent before and what they indicated they do and can spend. So there was no ask, but there also was no indication that there was a higher need.
Was there a conversation on that with you?
Yeah, this is kind of a unique program because it started very, very small out of the Walnut Street Community Center back years ago. I don't know how many years ago. And basically, in partnership with the city, we identified some funding for them. Initially, I don't believe it was even CDBG. So this was not something that originally came to the city from the application process. It's become a very, very large community-focused event where, yes, the backpacks are kind of the hook, but it also gets people connected with a lot of different services and becomes an outstanding kind of multiple agency participation. Also to even the organization and the stuffing of the backpacks in the first place, which I encourage everyone to participate in, is in and of itself a really good community type of event. CARES is a small organization. I know that I believe, funded them a little bit through ARPA over the years, and they do great work. And this was, kind of a mayor's office priority, and because previously it was run out of the mayor's office, it was something that I just knew that I was always going to want to fund.
And I'm gonna probably use them for outreach this year. We originally used them for outreach since they got qualified under COVID because we included like hand sanitizer and masks and like documentation on what they could reach for assistance. But I do plan on putting what code gives out for resources in the city and have CARES provide those in the backpack. It's a way we can do outreach to the community.
And I think an application.
It's a conversation. It's just something that, as mayor, I know that I want to directly kind of fund them. I think that, my budgets will have them in there. I feel kind of the same way about the Boys and Girls Clubs over the years, and frankly Vines too, but Vines does a good job, and Boys and Girls Club about applying. It's a very, they have a strong partnership with the mayor's office and work a lot with the city to get that event done.
Let's see. So we talked about rebalancing the after-school programs between Boys and Girls Club and Urban League. Then there's the rent to pay for the technology center, right? So their original ask was $22,500, and then it's CDAC and current budget like $87,000, and then paying rent on that facility.
Yeah, that covers the annual rent for 47 North Street.
Very good. At a $75,000 request, CDAC, we have 10, it's nothing currently.
Yeah, so as part of what we can, to talk further, Northside has 5,000 in previous budget line that we can use to spend down, that's still available for them. So we want to have that, spent down.
They have some operating money for them that they haven't spent.
It was only 5,000, you said?
That's correct. Yep.
With Girls Club, we talked about the FACE program, the Rights Foundation asked for 35, CDAC recommended 10, current budget jumps it up to 25. I've seen some of their events and stuff. I don't actually know a tremendous amount about the program, but it's how much, they're very reliant on this funding. Yes, I guess.
Yeah, they're a newer nonprofit. Again, supported through ARPA previously. They're doing a lot of work.
The after school program.
Yeah.
And they sorry to cut you off, Mayor. And they work with like parents. So it's not only the after school program, it's with parents also.
And it was,
So, I'm sorry, what were you saying, Rebecca?
I was just gonna represent, and I believe you were there too, the interview with the executive director really demonstrated, plus hearing the testimonies from families, parents who were impacted.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of impact.
It's a very good program.
But they only funded it 10,000 instead of, but we are probably in favor of the boost to 25. Access for older persons, everyone agreed across the board there. Oh, and community policing, CDAC allocated 13,000, and there's nothing in the current budget. And you mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, that was just
Stuff that they gave that.
concession by me.
There's no ask for it either, was my understanding. No ask for- or my incorrect.
No, they came to city council or to CDAC and said they wanted funding.
But
So
they-
it's not like an outside agency, so they do, our department heads.
Yeah.
Okay.
So between youth programming and human services, any other questions, issues hanging out there, any comments? I think that was pretty much the line of line. So then we'll jump to infrastructure. So I think this is just a wording, or probably a limit on the space in the budget line, but there were originally 3 streets being paid for.
Yeah,
And only, did we reduce that to 1 street, or it just doesn't fit on the page?
I'm assuming it's all 3 streets.
Okay.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, all right, so we're still,
Mhm.
Colfax, yes.
Yeah, that's what's in the
Okay.
hearing. So,
All right. So then we get to the park upgrades. So.
So
we have-
my understanding of that is that the Parks Department did a wish list of all of the things that they could want that that would qualify, but that they didn't actually have the capacity to implement all the projects. So I guess I would request, and of course inform my CDAC next year to make sure they're asking the questions of the city commissioners when they come down to say, okay, you're asking for these things, but can you actually deliver on each of these things ahead of time? Because they allocated money for 4 parks when, to my understanding, 4 parks was not actually doable. So there was some discrepancy in what was presented and what was doable, which I think is, frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to include Webster Street. First conversation I had with Councilman Rathmel was about Webster Street, so I want to make sure that that was included. And then Rec Park, we did receive some grant funding for the pool deck through a governor's office initiative. So this is to continue on some of the progress at Rec Park. Positive way.
And I was promised Alfred will be in next year's budget.
Alfred
Is
and
that your understanding too?
Phelps was the other one.
Phelps was the other one.
sure, those seem like good additions next year.
So, let's see. Then it's public infrastructure, parks, we're in capital. So this is where we have some differing opinions, I think, between CDAC and what was proposed budget. So in the proposed budget, we have the Phelps Mason replacement being about 57,000, and the YMCA roof being cut to 41,000. We had other roof requests. Post 80, which CDAC had funded to $70,000 out of $300,000 request, and that is not the budget. Robertson roof is asked for 100,000. CDAC and the budget don't have it. Set Hamilton house roofing at 60,000, not the budget, or CDAC's proposal. And the stack building was $100,000 ask. CDAC put 50 in their budget, and something in the proposed budget. So we'll talk about those items.
So to represent the American Legion, a recommendation from CDAC, so they came in strong with that 300 grand request. My understanding and talking with members, because I wasn't there for all of the conversations, is they initially there's a match component to the funds spent, and so in discussing the viability of a 300 grand award, the conversation, the request specifically from CDAC to American Legion folks was, can this be done incrementally? And so what is, if you were to identify the first phase that is most critical, what's the amount? They came back with a plan for incremental work to be done. And it was that conversation, as well as a recognition by CDAC members that the Legion is one of the few remaining spots in the city that groups can reserve for free, use for events, its location as well. They're in discussing with them the Phelps Mansion recommendation. Their feedback was that in conversation with Phelps folks, I don't want to say it was the executive director because I'm not sure who it was that presented, but was under the impression that this would be funding that they could access immediately this summer, and said that if they couldn't get it this summer, they would find some other way to get it because of their development strategy and their other arms for fundraising. And so they very specifically felt.
Right. So I said, this is money they need this summer, but this is next year's money.
Correct. They were under the impression that it was, from what I was told, in conversation, Phelps folks were under the impression it would be more immediately accessible, and represented that if they couldn't get it this summer, they had other avenues through which to get the funding, which ultimately was the reason that Phelps and Roberson wasn't included, because of other identified opportunities to access funding.
Any updates to that?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke with the Phelps Mansion a few weeks ago about it. I believe, and this deserves further follow-up, that because it's going to be reimbursable, that they are working on having that funding in place so that they can get the grant and make it reimbursable. I didn't have a conversation about like the timeline on anything. As it relates to, the American Legion, again, it was the concept of what other funding is in place to kind of finish that project, or can we, is there other money that's being leveraged? It's a large project to fix the roof and to pay for just a kind of a portion of it. Again, going back to the belief that there's going to be something that gets off the ground that we can reimburse and draw down from HUD. I had some, I think, concerns on that based on what their application said and what they were representing. Roberson got some money a few years ago for some roof work, so I didn't think that it was a priority. One thing I'll say about the Phelps Mansion, I think they're going to be doing some outreach on this too, is that they are expanding their partnership with Broome County Arts Council and being a destination for folks on First Friday. They're opening up their partnerships with the Philharmonic. For many, many years, especially when it was known as the Monday Afternoon Club, that facility is pretty shut off from Binghamton, and they're looking to kind of reverse that and be more of an accessible public space. So that was just, again, my opinion on it. Not necessarily super strong feelings, but I think there would be a concern over Legion getting that done and getting that reimbursed that I wouldn't have with Phelps.
They're going to be sending more information to council. I've been in touch with their board recently. There's been some turnover in the board. So hopefully we'll get more clear information on that. They are currently working on kind of the emergency roof repair situation, because it's a highly critical need. We're very
Yes, I
So
mean, it
there-
seems like there's certainly agreement that's would be a concern that makes sense, whether or not the project can move forward. But I think what I want to make sure I'm representing from CDAC perspective is it's a concern that they had as well, and a concern that they extensively discussed with
Right.
the applicant and deliberated. The only other piece that I love the Phelps Mansion, like personally my kids do. I think the component that I want to make sure we're remembering is that the focus is low mod income community members, and it may be in an eligible location, but in terms of, again, like love me the Philharmonic, love me the Arts Council, but like that's not typically readily accessible without a pretty significant shift in like mission and outreach strategy at an executive level to lower income folks.
Now, the wise ask, assuming that's not gonna replace the whole roof on that place either, is that a smaller project?
That
or
was
chunk of
the
it?
goal, so they're expanding, and Julia alluded to this, they're adding housing, so they're reconfiguring the building. And so this was it's not a whole new roof, it's an aspect to make sure that they can follow through on those configurations. The thing that this isn't anywhere in CDAC's stuff, the thing that I'll continue to harp on, because I think everybody across the board is on the same page with the housing first approach. If we're lending city money to a project like that, then I don't think it's unreasonable that they need to demonstrate a housing first perspective with utilization of that housing, because they currently don't.
Have they submitted any actual plans for the conversion yet to planning? Like, I mean, I know they announced what they're doing, but it seems like it's a major,
Discussions.
like, I like, is this money going to get spent this year or next year even? Like, I feel like it.
Well, the time period will be the spend
I mean, next
September
year,
to August,
yeah,
would be September,
yeah.
August.
They're moving forward.
Any other infrastructure questions? Code enforcement. Next. Dollars, right? They do the whole tracking.
They qualify if it's a low mod area and if the building is considered deteriorated, each individual call is considered, and it's a population. It's basically how many LMI deteriorated calls do you have versus the total population, multiplied by your salary you earned over the same time frame.
Now, demolition, we have a significant difference between what CDAC recommended and what's in the proposed budget, $200,000 versus $357,330. How do we come up with that item?
I think it's because when Steve gave me the new number, like, how
That's
do
where you
we-
put the odd.
I think so, yeah,
change.
I think so, I totally recall. This is a decrease from last year, so,
Was it 400?
Last year was a significant increase.
So we have now plans from plans, yeah, just off the discussion.
they,
But they have closed it.
should do outreach, they came in, they talked to me, so it would be good to know. I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about the community work session
I
or
mean, it's
something.
gotta be a
interesting.
multi-million-dollar project
They
to
closed
convert
their swimming pool, they canceled on it.
that building.
They had the space, it's a reconfiguration of, they also, I believe they got Code Blue funding. Don't quote me on that. I think it's worth looking into, and I think there's some things to pull together, because there are a couple of conversations.
So, there is a Broome County foreclosure list for the first time since foreclosures were suspended. So since COVID, the county has not been doing foreclosures in which generate a list of properties that the city can look through, identify properties that are too far gone, that are in need of demolition, that we take. There's also a local law that allows us to get some pre-demolition asbestos screening back. So within the next year, I don't know the time frame. I don't have the information. It's not back from a judge, I'm told. The county will have these properties, and there will be many in the city of Binghamton that need to be demolished, that are just too far gone, and we need to be ready to do it. If we don't have demolition money, we can't take the properties, and I'm not sure what the county does with those properties. And I anticipate there being a significant expense to continuing to demolish those properties.
The that perspective on that reduction from last year, which was a reduction, but also last year's was specifically increased by over 250 grand at your request to 468 grand in the final. I think so I don't want to say I think, what was specifically represented by CDEC members is that they have accepted and approved the increase in demolition requests for at least the past 40 years, some of those very significant increases, and they want to see this money reinvested in redevelopment as opposed to just knocking the buildings down. And I think what I would add to that, and we've had conversations around how those demolition discussions or decisions, are made. Like this, to me, if there were a strategy or correlating, we'll at least call it, strategy around or framework through which those demolition conversations are had, that is consistent, that is transparent, then we could get at a number for such significant increases. But I feel like CDAC, I don't want to say I feel, because this is specifically what they represented, because they represent every district, plus there are 3 mayoral appointees. This was another one that they unanimously rejected increases for and still went with the 200,
The 100.
thank you, the lower amount, because if that funding for capital is available, they want it to see it reinvested in redevelopment rather than continuing to reduce the housing stock.
I would say that the type of properties we're targeting, I would not say would be counted for housing stock. It is severely blighted, condemned, structurally unsound buildings that are being foreclosed on by Broome County. One of the measures in which I know that we're funding blight at the correct amount, or maybe even underfunding it, is the fact that we spend it down every year. I mean, every year we have more of a need for blight reduction than we have available funding. And while the takeover of the Angier properties took a big chunk out of, we have had years where we have not been foreclosing on, or county's not been foreclosing on, and we have been not diverted bad properties. And aside from the land bank, the city is the only entity that will go in and get rid of these properties. Broome County doesn't have funding in their general fund. There's no kind of other avenue. So there's no kind of B team if the city doesn't take the lead on getting them demolished.
But another aspect of this program, go to the property list, the foreclosure property list from the county, and properties that we think are viable, we have code and property officer go through them. We'll bundle them and offer them to agencies and to renovate. The last one we did, I think, was with SUNY Broome, the Montauk Street Scary Site properties, the ones that are literally beyond salvage. And have one on Lake Street that we're hoping to partner with someone to take on with the renovation loan on that 15 years ago. When before Lake, they estimated $4 million to renovate. It was going a little above and beyond, but so we do, we'll go through all of them, and any property subject to demolition, Dylan, the historic preservation planner, goes through every single property, and he is a building inspector from code that came to work for me. And he goes through it and gives his opinion, whether or not it's salvageable, and talk to the mayor about it, and there is a whole process and a huge level of review before. We do keep the ones out that can be used, and we renovated a number of them. If you work with someone to get a grant.
Yeah, the age of the housing stock just kills it. Even using CDBG and home grant actually makes it more problematic to use those, because we have to meet asbestos, radon, lead requirements, and most of the property has been constructed pre-1950, even a lot even before 1939. I make the joke, it's all the lead and asbestos you can eat, and it really is.
Those are all, so I think, and I think two thoughts that come to mind. One would be directly related to unspent funding, which capital is an eligible use for that unspent funding because our human services can't cap, so it can't be the capital eligible. Like the other question to relate it back to the comp plan, there's a definition, Steve, that you identify in terms of the substandard considerations where essentially benchmark or not redeveloping or rehabbing if the rehab will cost more than the final home value.
That's,
How does that, so it's always going to, like, that's just foregone conclusion, it's always going to cost more, but that, like, that can't be the definition that is strategically used, because we can't just get rid of the opposite, like, there's, I mean, I'll pull this in my comments for the comp plan, but.
I think that's a standard HUD definition.
Right, but it's not it doesn't serve a strategic purpose.
Well, it identifies, okay, so for example, it would, if you were in the flood zone, if you were in the prelim flood zone even, and you were going to redevelop a project that would do more than 50% development, consider major development, depending on that, where that is in the flood zone, that goes from a $100,000 project to a $400,000, $500,000 project to meet floodplain requirements, just elevation and all this other stuff. So that identifies, because there's several factors within the environmental reviews that kick in once you start doing some substantial rehabilitation.
Right, and so understand, I'm saying like that, all of that is just foregone conclusion, like very clear, has been clear for a long time. The age of the housing stuff, it's not new information to anyone. So like applying an actual strategic, I get that the CHAS, I mean, it exists for comp planning, so I understand why it is used, but there, I think, are demonstrated other opportunities for more strategic conversations around.
And the other thing is there are projects that don't need that much money to go into. So, I mean, is it worth us developing a project, a building that's on the edge of collapsing or whatever, and putting $200,000, $300,000 in it, or doing $50,000 or $60,000 projects, properties that are much more easily
Comp plan with priorities
rehab.
that are clearly identified makes sense as a reference point, and I don't think we have the depth of that data in the comp plan.
Yeah, I don't think there's information on quality of housing stock. I don't think we have any information.
For what other eligible uses, if there is less money, less than there is on that $330, where could that money otherwise go the other
That's such an open-ended question. It's easier for me to tell you what it's not.
Okay.
What would you, if you have an
Within
idea?
the
I can
budget.
go over it.
Within the budget, yeah.
Oh, within the budget, you can go anywhere, other
So
than
you
services.
could go
Any other,
except services, and we have caps on admin and, salary stuff.
that's what I was.
But I again, I want to reiterate, and I want to be very, very clear that the county is going to foreclose on, I don't know how many properties. They're going to allow people to redeem all the way up to,
Like
I
the day
think,
of the auction.
pretty much, yeah. If they do an auction. But there are going to be these severely blighted properties in neighborhoods that are going to be owned by Broome County, that unless the city steps up to say we're going to demolish them, I'm not sure what the other plan is, because, and I don't have a list of those properties, and I wish I did. I wish I could say, hey, we'll average 30,000 for demo, 15,000 for asbestos removal. We could have a better idea. We don't, but I believe that because it's been years since the county has done this, the number of properties that need to be demolished will exceed whatever it is budgeted. And I think we want to get it as high as, we're comfortable doing, because, we need to tear these properties down. It's going to become a constituent complaint concern as well. The county is not going to be interested in doing anything with the properties.
Is that, so when you say that the county isn't going to be interested in, that's because that's what they've represented, like you've had conversations with county folks who are saying there's no plan for the these properties, they're not deliberating around what the plan could or should be.
Well, I think if you look at from a, yeah, if you look at like a countywide perspective, and this is not because I've had a specific conversation with any county officials, it's, okay, so the county forecloses on properties. If it's in the village of, I don't know, town of Fenton, right? They're gonna send all those properties to auction, or they're going to assign the few that need to be demolished to the land bank. The land bank's gonna demo it. The sheer number of that are in the city, you know, the land bank, I don't believe has the funding in order to take on all of those demolitions. And the county, because they're going to be required to sell and get appraisals on all these properties and, you know, can't make money off them anymore. I don't know what incentive they would have to do anything with them. If the city doesn't step up and take them, and again, this is stuff that's affecting all of our constituents and all of our neighborhoods. The county doesn't have funding to do demolitions.
To clarify for the minutes, you said you don't have that list.
Their folks can redeem. The last I've heard is that it's in court. And that if you look through, I mean, technically speaking, if you go on Broome GIS and look through the actual court documents, but I've tried and it's not helpful because those also include properties that won't be foreclosed on.
All right, redevelopment housing / rehab. This purchase rehab budget got doubled for the CDAC.
I'm sorry, Robert, which one?
I went to community development housing rehab. But next thing. So 75,150. Round it up.
We have the list of about, it's about 4 years, between 3 and 4 years of people who apply, low moderate income individuals, homeowners that are current on the taxes are eligible. Homes, basically, code deficiencies are priority, non-luxury repairs such as, high-end or, furnaces, things that are substandard, and the properties that we're working on there's no other way they could do this. So that's what these projects do, and that's why I asked for.
So is the money the bottleneck, or is the available contractor the bottleneck, or is
That
it?
is the contract.
So that is the bottleneck.
Well, I will say, yeah, well, the money is, so right now we're at 40K currently, for that line. That's for first-time home buyers right there, and that'll wipe it out. That's not even including the funding for the energy efficiency program, which we've seriously dialed back because of the lack of funding that we have available. Yeah, purchase rehab, yeah.
Lead risk,
That funding gets those towards replacing, prices, however years,
First-time
kitchen
home buyers.
appliances.
lead risk got bumped up.
That'll cover not just lead risk, but we're starting to follow more strictly the radon and asbestos rules as well.
Can what is the level of, so we've also had, I mean, as we're considering code enforcement legislation that's introduced, we've also had conversation with the health department. State residential registry needs significant amount of funding that they're getting. It's not yet accessible and does not yet have a final set of regulations attached to it. I imagine that you're already in, I shouldn't assume, are you already having been in conversation with the health department regarding their, not only the lead hazard program, but the New York State rental lead registry funding that they were awarded, to see where the opportunities for collaboration are?
We used to have them involved with our lead risk program. I don't know if they still have the money right now for it. Did you say they're out? They were doing lead, because there would be projects where we would determine that using their money for lead abatement would be better than using our money for it. So
I think maybe what I'm saying, then I guess it seems like it may make sense, especially because now they have the funding for the rental registry and are figuring out how to collaborate even internally. It seems like it makes sense as a.
We just got that one of the last
Yeah.
Reaching out to them, going into another agreement. for levy. What we really need is help with asbestos.
Yeah, asbestos is going to become the big one, I think.
In the housing services line, I'm not,
That's salary.
that's salary. Okay. So what happened to the YMCA emergency housing program?
So,
$34,500.
so the YM or YW?
Why did YM?
Okay. So the YM program, they applied for their service program under CDBG and their capital program under ESG. Now, technically, both will qualify under either one. Because they applied under CDBG for their service program, they went to the competitive aspect of that. And for whatever reasons, I mean, I don't think, was it CDAC didn't make a recommendation on it, did they?
Hey.
They asked if they could qualify under ESG, and I said, no, you can't qualify under ESG because they applied under CDBG. And then the capital program was basically zeroed out by ESG because the COC wanted to give them all their salaries and revoked it. So I said, well, they would still qualify under capital.
So they had asked for 34.5, CAC gave them 15, and there's nothing in the.
Oh, okay.
I spoke to the YMCA on it, and if you look at their request as part of their application, they're getting for the actual services money, 160 something thousand from the county. 25 was to help, I guess, upstart the program. And the conversation I had is that why can't the county just pay for that? I mean, it's diverting people that are staying in hospital beds into a shelter. So I kind of said, look, our CDBG funding, these other agencies don't have a place like county DSS to go for that. Can you please explore if that can be covered by the county? I'm happy to advocate that it gets covered by the county because it opens up beds. I think it would save the county money too. Go for that and then explore those options. If something comes up where you can't, then come back to the city. We can work on, see if we can get something funded, maybe even through capital or some otherwise, but it just seems like such a small amount of money for the addition of the beds.
And CDOT did ask the question, code blue funding is available for that exact reason. So I know they had a discussion regarding the same approach, like if the county, if the state is funneling that much money to the county.
Why do we have to pick up? Next, Binghamton Homeownership Academy, 20,000, right up there. My question, how is Binghamton Homeownership Academy doing with people? Like, are we still giving funding conditions and such and interest rates? Are people still making it through? And
That's why we've lost, we spent down so much money out of our homeownership rehab is because people are going there to try to buy a home, so they have to do the training and stuff like that. And Metro is going to also start doing fair housing training, so we're going to start having them in our fair housing training program as well. Yeah.
the senior prep program is the first word action.
First word action comes to it.
The services per kid, planning is
Salaries.
salaries.
GIS is just an agreement with the county.
Administration,
Salary.
salaries. So this is the line that's you and your,
Board member services, that's CDAC site.
well, right, I know that, but the admin services.
Oh, admin services, yeah, that's me, Shannon, portion of Danielle and Jeff and Cam are mainly covered through housing, but they qualify under admin as well. It's sort of like you go from whatever pool you spend on. But this specifically is not, doesn't include that, just for calculation estimations.
We have. So, right, so this is, now in the home fund, which is 225,000, and we kind of did 396,000.
Which one?
The home fund. The funding amount.
Rehabilitation
Yeah.
or?
Oh, yeah.
Rehab,
Oh,
okay.
rehab, okay. Another page.
What caused the change?
That was already discussed. I can jump down that discussion. This is the funding in addition to the grant, that they received for the renovation, stabilization pretty much of the home income homeowners.
And I think CDAC put a lot of that in Shodo.
Right, so why the rebalance? So yes, they had originally had 265,000 in home Chodo. So my question is why the rebalance between Chodo and
We had, over the years, put a lot of money into Chodo and in banking it. There's been a couple of projects that have moved forward, other ones that are going to have to be re-examined or maybe shifted. The project pipeline is pretty saturated with low-income housing tax credit projects. And in fact, we have way more than applicants than we have awardees. So in this year, because of the need for rehab, we just wanted to shift it more towards rehab. And we also are going to be spending home ARP and getting an RFP out for that, which is targeting individuals facing homelessness, correct? So that'd be a significant amount that's out there for capital.
That should be coming out.
Yeah.
But this keeps people in their homes also.
Yeah. It's code issues.
And the other thing is the cost of materials has just come through the roof.
Yeah.
So when I first started, I think we were at 50,000.
And now it's
75 plus 20. That's what we asked. That's our target, trying to go to that. And that a number has gone fast. Taking the roof off, putting that, and all sorts of stuff.
So, I missed the answer to my own question. We rebalanced Chodo and we have funding because we banked Chodo funding.
We banked Chodo. Chodo has been a priority for a number of years. We have more projects than can get awarded there. And we're also going to be issuing an RFP for home ARP funding, which covers, it's for capital similar to Chodo for folks that are potentially experiencing homelessness. And as Juliet said, the rehabs, the costs are going up substantially.
And ESG, we seem to be pretty straightforward.
I think ESG is exactly what the COC recommends.
Pretty much.
CDAC approved, COC approved.
The only thing, there used to be an admin line in there.
Yeah, we're not doing admin anymore.
Okay.
It's too hard.
It's too hard to track.
It's salary tracking. I would have to literally track how much time I only spend on this project. And it's just not worth it. We can just put in a program, so the rest we cover from PTA.
So that goes through all that. I think we probably have a little bit more research question, or a little bit more research and discussion. That I think was very helpful getting reasoning behind all the changes and stuff. So thank you for that. You want to talk about, Rebecca has some thoughts on the comprehensive, on the consolidated plan and the action plan.
That's
I
mainly
do,
gonna
I
be
mean,
the
how are we doing on time?
Awful, but
Yeah.
So what I would
We're all
say is
here.
that, that if it's, I am not involved in that big packet. I'm aware of it and everything, but, those are technical things or narrative-based things.
My thought was I could send the comments and revisions to, not only council, but Juliet, Steve, copy you by July 1st, so that by the time we get to the public hearing, which, we can, I'm not saying we don't want, if you want to talk about it and put it on record, I'm happy to.
well, do you want to get some crazy of your thoughts?
I think first, maybe the most relevant comment would be on the data sources used for the comp plan. I think if we print things from 2014, anything that's more than a decade old is too outdated to be considered relevant in a way for context. The Broome County Housing Needs Assessment, though, solid data choice for sure, especially the level of detail it goes into for reference and strategic planning. But as far as I can tell, only the executive summary was reviewed and considered in the comp plan, which is not the most impactful. I think there are, and I'll try to replace the pages that are, or recommend replacing the pages that were identified in the appendix that Steve with some information that I think is a lot just more helpful in terms of strategic considerations. A note on the comprehensive housing affordability strategy data literally exists to support comp planning. So there is a more recent query available from the 2016 to 2020 that you used. I don't think that's significant.
It's autofilled. IDS autofill. Yeah, IDS autofill.
Okay, and there's no significant difference in the more recent query. I think is just my opinion. The CHODS data is more useful when it's further tabulated and compared from one year to the next to identify trends. So I've got a couple of examples of tabulations that exist that I think get a bit more granular, again, to aid in the actual strategic priority identification.
I can compare it to the previous one, if you want that.
Well, and I'll try to put as specific as I can, whatever's helpful. One of my biggest things I think that's lacking in the comp plan is a direct. You dropped a lot of data, which I love, but the narrative that's useful to connect the data to the priority goals is not there. And I think there are, so looking at Syracuse's comp plan, Ithaca, Elmira, like data, again, one of my favorite things, but without a contextual narrative to connect the dots, most people aren't going to look at that data table and say that makes sense for this priority goal. And I think that's probably one of the pieces missing. The reason, though, that I think the Broome County Housing Needs Assessment is such a good choice for as a data source, though, is that it does it really well. So I think it's an easy, not easy, but there's they do really well representing cost burden comparisons and the substandard versus obsolete. So that's where I'm kind of saying, pulling from what we already have to work with to connect the dots, because the priorities at this point are too general to be strategic and too vague to actually represent in terms of identifying need.
I mean, the goals and priorities have always been vague. We could definitely be more specific. The goals in this one were based off of CDAC sort of wish fulfillment. Although I could tie it to activities. It's unfortunate because I told CDAC at the very beginning, you need to have goals and then work towards those goals. And unfortunately, that has never happened since I've been here, because well, I told them at the beginning, you need to have goals and then identify programs and projects that will meet that goal. So instead, what we have is a sort of reverse workaround where they fund projects, and I go, well, since they're funding this project and they have this wish fulfillment goal list here, how does that connect to that to create goals? Now, the data does tend to support that. I mean, you saw the three main priorities are housing, life, and homelessness, which are things that have just been identified ad nauseum for the last several years. So I don't think the goals are incorrect specifically. It's just, yeah, I see what you're saying, where there needs to be more of a direct connection between them, but unless we want to break housing down into more specific goals, like housing for such and such levels of income or housing these things.
So I understand.
Can we put a pin in this for a minute? It's the mayor. Can have
Jump to which?
the
Could I actually ask, so we just got the report that you were able to obtain. I don't feel like I'm prepared to have a conversation about the onset.
can we have a brief conversation?
Of course.
Right. So we have the request for spending that came down to work session, $300 for 2 med cars and turnout gear. What we asked for was, all right, so this is money going back for how long, from what funds. So this is a brief report of the lifetime availability currently sitting on all these funds. Is that including both allocated? No, you've stripped out 50 and 49, 50.
Page 2.
So
Basically, I basically separated these out. So unspent funds in 49 and 50, and obviously 50 is the year we're currently in, 49 was just last year. At minimum, these are active. It would not be good to remove funding from there because there's still projects and everything. So this is going back, basically, these are all of the available funds. And then I highlighted in green, these are the budget lines that
you're tapping
we're tapping for these other things. So basically, because of spend down pressures from HUD, they want us to consolidate these lines. They want us to do action plan amendments to get the projects spent down. Again, as it relates to projects that go out, we all know that we're capped on human services and et cetera. But one of the things that has slowed spend down in the past are large capital outlays to nonprofits, or even internal projects that involve maybe, obviously multi-month, multi-year planning. The need of the fire department and our conversations with them based on actual emergency response guides why this is important, but not as important, but still important, is the fact that this money can be spent on very quickly, that the equipment can be purchased, the vehicles can be purchased, and we can achieve the timeliness or have less of a chance of HUD saying you're not timely with what needs to happen. Now, it's changed multiple times in the last year, 18 months with all of the changes in Washington. We went from having a new staff in HUD at the end of last year to having no staff at HUD in Buffalo to now apparently some staff. We don't know what's going to happen with CDBG permanently. It's a very unknown thing. But what I do know is that as the city has done before, consolidating older budget lines to fund kind of pertinent areas. And the fire department has been asking for these. There is kind of an immediate need, and it's important to fund them. I did not take all of the lines, and as you can see, I left things with programming. Again, although that can't be transferred into more services, can that be converted into something else that is a capital outlay to nonprofit? There is fair housing money from past years. It's about 20,000. That can be something that is an agency or some sort of other funding source that we can do with that money. These were lines that, in an amount that I felt would do a lot to meet our timeliness, and also respond to kind of an immediate need for the city.
That timeliness priority is still, in terms of identifying a benchmark or performance metric. I understand spend down, certainly encouragement from HUD, like familiar with that. I think its scope and impact. I mean, I don't think you'll hear any of us represent that funding the fire department wouldn't be a priority. But in terms of the specific, again, low to income household and community goal with these funds, and it being such a small and general amount, which is not at all to represent that that's even like my primary kind of topics of conversation for this particular discussion, but we've got to come up with a better benchmark than just the timeliness.
Yeah, look, in terms of just the med cars, just as an example, automatically senior citizens qualify under HUD. Obviously, large majority of our med calls are going out for seniors. The city fire department is a critical resource for all different types of neighborhoods, the city as a whole being low mod. And it is kind of, I don't want to say like meeting the moment, but fire department had identified these needs. We're working with them. We know that money needs to be, spent down, that we can't allow these to kind of just like sit in the lines. And I think it makes a lot of sense. We looked at different versions of this that were, I don't want to call them like my pet projects, because that it's a negative connotation, but things that maybe were not like absolutely mission critical services, or things that we maybe were wants and not needs. This is a need, and then it also saves us funding as part of the budget as well. Because if not for this, we're going to have to spend this amount of money through the general fund, which is not preferable.
So this money basically has to go to capital use at this point. There's no room left for program.
No.
Service programs, yeah, it's
Correct. So it doesn't matter really what the line originally said.
Easier to spend than their money. But that's part of the plan, the action plan. And that you're
If it's so the goal is
I'm
always
just
to
asking this
try to not move them out of the lines. You can't, but sometimes you got to.
But like board member services has nothing to do with a main car.
No.
Like, I'm just
And-
saying, is there a reason we're not prioritizing just getting rid of the oldest lines first?
Well, I think, no, because there's enough that we can spend as part of this reallocation that, of old lines to bring down the amount that's out there. And for these other lines that are kind of not included, I think that there can be, look, at one point, the city made a priority for youth programming, right? All the 9,000 was spent. Is there a way that we can, come up with our next budget amendment that finishes out all of these other unspent money in a way that gets the money out there, or for fair housing, which doesn't require a budget amendment? It could just be spent.
Why would we not be trying to make up the demo gap with unspent funding?
We could, we absolutely could. I think that I'm not sure what the other total is, but I would absolutely advocate more money going to the demo. That's an area that I would support. Actually, that had been done previously. The council, and this is a decade plus ago.
Not a suggestion on my part, simply an inquiry to the next.
That I jumped on.
Dang it.
But but I would still prioritize this equipment request for fire even above the demos. It's not something that kind of came out of thin air, and it accomplishes a couple different goals, and again leaves some room. We're not capturing everything to continue to work on the spend down in other areas. And it has to be.
But if you were to do this here, you're not proposing putting additional money into low-income neighborhood work into the general budget, because we'd be moving the fire stuff out. It would be to
Just release pressure on.
release pressure on the budget.
Yeah.
Not to swap it so that we can help in work. Right, so-
They're helping low-income areas. These
Yes,
things are
but
helping
it would be
low-income
done typically through a traditional budget process, right? Turnout here for the fire department would normally be done through the traditional budget process. So we'd be removing it from the traditional budget process at the expense of projects in low-income areas, because this has to be done and normally would be done through the traditional budget process. Right? Am I understanding this
Well,
correctly?
that's not. Yeah, and the other thing too is that it's not a zero-sum game. So the needs, it's not like we're going to then cut 300,000 from the fire department in other ways, because like the fire department has historically not received CDBG money, and I don't. In the conversation with the union and the chief, and it's not really clear why, because they are eligible in a way that the police department is not. Obviously provide services to low non-income folks, obviously provide services to senior folks, and their equipment costs are gigantic. And I think that the city in the future should look at, using CDBG to pay for capital and equipment priorities in the fire department.
And that's not at all so yes, they're eligible, yes, it makes sense, in terms of the comparing what's being spent in general budget. I think for me, and this is the conversation that I'm hoping we're not really getting into at the moment, was the process by which the unspent funds were identified, the notification of its availability for use. And then I think I'd also we're having conversations around, but like in the same way that you were able to identify the unspent funds and deliberate regarding other uses, like that's something that I think council is also hoping to have the opportunity to consider now that we know what fund, or we're getting closer anyway to having a better understanding of what funding is available. So we're hoping for the same kind of opportunity to understand and deliberate that you've represented you had with the unspent funding in particular.
And the biggest thing, and one of the reasons why I move forward with the fire department was to try to come up with a consensus, because it does have to be a consensus. This has to be the mayor and city council both agreeing on moving these out of these lines, as it is a budget amendment. So we both have to be on board with whatever happens. And I thought that what was proposed was about as bipartisan and hopefully at the core of what we're doing as a city, and not demolitions or things that maybe there's somewhat of differences of opinion from time to time on. That was intentional.
What's our next step on this RL?
Has to get signed out.
Well, no, I know,
Oh.
I understand.
I mean, that's the next step.
I mean, and I guess we can discuss that, but it's I mean, two different RLs that we're packing into this
Yes,
conversation.
yes,
We had a
yes,
lot
for
of
sure.
an
So-
extensive discussion and time to review the first one, although not a ton of time in regards to the comp plan specifically, but I would request more time for this.
Well, I think we're also still waiting on more information from the nonprofits, for example, the American Legion, that's going to be sending more information
So
to council on.
we scheduled the public hearing for as far as the fiscal 51, so we scheduled the public hearing. But we have as far as we know, a hard date of the 15th.
Submittal to HUD.
Have we ever submitted, like requested an extension? Is there an opportunity to request an extension?
We
What
could
is it?
request an extension if necessary. I don't know if they'll grant it, but it is a possible thing.
But we could request it.
We have to
There is a drop dead date.
Substantiate, sure.
There is a drop dead date. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I think it's like a month later.
We just,
Yeah,
If you can find the drop dead date. Or, sorry. Not, which is not against you, Steve, I just don't think I set that up.
I'm not necessarily,
Fair, Juliet, fair.
I'm not necessarily in favor of messing with HUD.
I'm not,
there's just,
I'm
there's
not saying that.
It's
that's our
chaos.
concern.
Yeah, there's some.
So,
I would like
I'm
to
not,
work.
I'm not advocating for the, like, my
I just wanna know,
goal would
yeah.
be every, but if there's wiggle room, that's what I'm curious about, particularly because this plan guides is intended to guide
If there were
funding discussions.
eventual language change to the product plan, is that amend with HUD later?
To amend the con plan language after it's been submitted.
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I don't think that's allowed other than a substantial amendment to the action plan, so.
Just throw that out there. See what we have to get by and then, and
and
then,
fix it later.
We've never done that.
The ideal would be.
I mean, it's a difference between, these are the boxes we need to check
Right, because we don't want to lose our money.
versus, let's have a
We also want
thoughtful
to get it right.
plan put together
It's
that's,
just such an
Yeah.
opportunity to have that thoughtful, I mean,
Discussion.
and maybe we can do it in 2 weeks. And like I said, I'll send my recommend how that I am at all the end all be all. I'm trying not to demonstrate that, but I think we have immediately available and relevant data to demonstrate the priorities in a way that is a bit more strategic.
no.
One more, yeah, one, and that, so we talked about the issue, kind of high level, the barriers to spend down for projects, but do you guys actually track that? Like what the spend down barriers are and what's the city doing to assist or?
Well, it's different things for different reasons. Some of these are internal. The fact that, HUD came out with updated guidance on how we spend down salary money, so that's
That's a huge
contractual.
part of
It's a
it.
huge part of it. That was us following HUD's rules,
And
did
then
not
they
allow us to spend as much. And probably years and years and years ago, the city was, spending maybe way more than they should have been. There was times where we were paying for police officers that HUD has changed its interpretations. And so that's a huge chunk of this. And then others, again, if you're talking about fiscal year 46, a capital set aside, these are programs that we dealt with, that we talked through, they just couldn't get under contract, weren't able to do the project, priorities change with nonprofits, that sort of thing. But, it was, some time ago.
All of these have been assigned projects, so we have to verify with them.
Right.
Where they stand, if, you have how long to use it, 2 years? With our contract?
With our contracts are usually annual, so most of the contracts follow the fiscal year, so again, September to August.
So we check with who was going to award the money before it gets. The lines that the mayor selected are primarily impacting the city. That's correct.
Yes.
And those are easy. So what we could also look at doing is pulling it and rolling it together. So fair housing education, and you said add up to like 20,000 and putting that towards the project. of fair housing.
Then that doesn't require an amendment to the action plan, that can just be a contract with an agency.
So youth program, the same thing, there's a number of different funding lines for programming, if they're not currently being used. You need to pull it all together and send out an RFP. So give us an idea.
We just have to be careful because there are caps, admin caps, service program caps, caps on non-OMI projects, so all
So
of
what
those.
doesn't make sense to me is that you've allocated things under the caps for those fiscal years, but you have to abide by, if you're using that money in this fiscal year, it has to abide by this year's caps
It's the sum total of everything that's spent on that, so if you
during
spend,
during that year,
it's based
Yeah.
off of the program
which
year,
is
so.
maddening because you've allocated the caps from the previous
Yes.
years, right? Yeah.
Seems
Welcome
like
to
that's what
HUD.
I've been saying.
And this is what's so frustrating, again, is during COVID, right, and there are other federal funding streams that didn't follow these guidelines. ARPA did not follow these guidelines. HUD needs to amend and reform CDBG so we don't have these arcane rules, and then them say, oh, hey, by the way, why are you guys having trouble spending this money? One of the
Because we
reasons
can't
is
spend it
because
on
we
the
can't
things
spend it
we
on the things we
Right.
want. Yes, nail on the head.
All right. Well, since I hit a nail on the head, I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn.
Well, that's motion.
Thank you.
All in favor? All right. Thank you so much. I think that was kind of a brutal one.
Okay, actually, that,